The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good morning. Welcome everyone. I'm Travis McGrath, part of the Exago services team. I'm going to be leading today's support lab, and we're going to be talking about visual integration and localization. Just to start out, I want to make sure everyone can hear me all right. So on the GoToWebinar, you have a questions panel. You could just type a Y or a yes or something to indicate that my audio is coming through, and you should be looking at the Exago support lab screen. Great, seeing a bunch of questions pop up. At any point throughout the webinar today, if you do have any questions, please feel free to type them in there. If they're general for the crowd, my colleague Emma, who's monitoring and answering questions, will bring them up and we can answer them for the group. Or if they're specific to you or your environment or they're on another topic of some sort, she'll answer them separately, or we'll get back to you after the webinar with a response. So with that, let's get started. Let's jump right into it. Now normally we go through some slides, but today what I want to do is actually just start showing you what we're looking to solve. So here we have a demo application. So Exago is an OEM application, fully integrated. We've shown this before in some of the other labs. And I'm just going to sign in as myself here. And this is really a placeholder for your application. So this sign-in is using one of our APIs, either our REST or our REST web service or our .NET API. And we're actually going to be covering that in more detail in next month's technical lab. So what I'm going to do here is just launch Exago within the host application. Again, skipping over the API details because we'll go into that in full detail next month in our lab. But what you'll notice here is that Exago appears, and I have access to all my reports, and this is fine, but it very clearly looks like a different application, right? It's orange, whereas my host application here is blue. And it says, welcome to Exago. Now it does below this say this tab is fully customizable. So the first thing we're going to talk about here is visual integration. How can we change the CSS icons and stylings so that this looks more like it's naturally part of the application and more seamlessly, blends in for a single user experience. And for us, what we're going to do today is really focus on just switching out the blue here, the orange throughout the Exago application for a blue that more closely matches our logo and our branding for this fictitious company here that we've set up. Now, to do that, we're going to work within the Exago installation itself. So I have this installed locally. So I'm going to go to where I have Exago installed in my program files, Exago, and this is our latest version be 2017.1, but this will work with other versions as well. Changing the CSS and stylings has always been paramount to the Exago application. And in here, I'm going to look under application themes. And what I'll notice is I have this theme called Basic. And the Basic theme contains all the images, fonts, and CSS of the Exago application. So here, if I want to, I can see all the CSS being used, and I can see all the images. And I can see these both as PNG for raster images, as well as SVGs, for images that are vectors and resized dynamically. Now, the nice part about SVGs is that if you modify one of them in a Notepad++ or a Word editor, you'll notice that they're actually text and they can be manipulated, so we can find, say, hex color values and change those out. So if I want to do this manually, what I can do is I can take the basic theme, make a copy of it, and then make my own specific changes to the CSS files or the icons. And this is very quick, very easy. But if I want to go throughout the entire application, I probably don't want to go to each CSS file, right, and search through and do find replace. That seems like a lot of work. So what we've done actually is on our support site, on the download page, as of this morning, you can go download. We've written a little utility that will, when run as an administrator, allow me to specify a new theme name and switch out the Exago orange. We have both a primary and sort of secondary orange, and switch that to show the full path, to build a new theme for us. So what I'm going to do, pardon me as I grab my notes here, I'm going to specify this, again, this theme maker is a utility that you now have available to you on the support site for download. And all this is doing is building a theme for us dynamically here. So I'm going to tell it where to go find the theme. I'm going to give the theme a name. And now I can select a color. This has a color picker, but I know what hex values I want to use. So here I'm just going to copy paste them. Now if I want to, I can apply this theme, but I'm going to show you where to apply the themes directly. So I'm just going to hit Create Theme. And what I'll notice here is that in my application theme folder, now in addition to Basic, I have this new theme. So I just want to pause there and mention again, what we're using here is a little utility to create the theme for us. First of all, that utility can be downloaded on our support site, but also the basic theme is already available, so you can take it, make a copy manually, and change it as you want. I see there are a few questions, so I'm just going to take a moment to see them. Yes, a question came on our support site, where is that download available? So if you go to exagosupport.com and you go to downloads, if you sign in, so if you're not signed in, you'll just see the documentation here. But if you sign in, you'll see, along with the application installers, you'll see some example code including this utility. So that's the first thing we need to do, is we have to build an application theme. But the second question is, once we have an application theme, how does Exago know to use it? Now, you can have as many application themes as you'd like, and you could set them dynamically through the API. So if you wanted to have a different application theme per client, you could do that. And we'll actually show that next month in our API webinar. But what we can do is in the support lab, if we go to our feature UI setting, in the admin console, if we go to our feature UI settings, we have two settings down at the bottom. So the first one says to use the SVG icons, and we want to set this to true. It's true by default, so that should be fine. But then also, if we go to application theme selection, and I'm just going to refresh my admin console to make sure I have the latest list here. If we look under this dropdown, it's going to list all the application themes that we have available. So in this case, I'm going to choose the theme we just made, and I'm going to click Apply. Now, if we come back and relaunch the Exago UI from our host application, it's going to pick up that change. And now you'll notice all the icons have changed to be blue, as well as all the CSS, so changing all the values here. So what we've done is we've effectively swapped out the Exago orange for a color that more closely matches our brand. Now you may say, well, wait, this getting started page is still orange and it still mentions Exago. Can we change that up? So that's going to be our next step, but I just want to pause here again. Are there any questions on application themes? Yeah, so a great question. So the question was, if you have multiple application themes, could you change them per user? And the answer is absolutely. So anything that can be done here in the admin console can be set dynamically as a user logs in using either a .NET or a REST-based API. So the application theme could certainly be changed if you had 4 different themes for 4 different clients of your own or different groups of users. Or maybe you launch Exago in a couple of different applications. You can absolutely set which theme should be used for that session. Great. So the next thing I want to do is I want to change this getting started content. And this tab is an initial tab in Exago. And the content here is totally customizable. And so the question is, well, where does that content live and how do we customize it? So for that, I'm going to go back to our installation. And under the config folder, there's a languages folder. And in here, there are a number of files. And you'll notice that some of them are custom, but there's some files that are going to exist here by default, like enus, enus getting started, enus tooltips, and then this esnx. So these files here are what tell Exago what language our UI should look at. And we'll look at specifically some of the more major files in just a moment. But by default, the getting started content is contained here in this file, enus getting started. We're going to open this in an editor. And what we can see here is that inside of this element, this is an XML file. So inside of this element, there is some HTML. And this HTML is what's going to drive this content. So we can do two things here. One, we could just change this particular HTML, and it will automatically change. But when we next go to update, this file is going to be overwritten. So instead, what we can do is we can make a copy of this file, and I've already done this here. Give it our own unique name. So in this case, I'm just going to append my company name on the end of it. And then we can make changes. Now in here, I will open this in an editor as well. So in here, what we've done is we've changed the HTML to make it more specific to our company. We've also done some neat things. You'll see the effect of these in just a minute. But we've added some announcements, some quick actions, and some tips and tricks. And the neat part about this is that while it is customizable content, within the getting started content, there are some available JavaScript methods. So for the web developers out there, this is neat because it means while it's customizable, it can still do things like open new tabs, launch reports, or open new wizards for creating reports. So what we'll see here is we've built this new page inside of a new language file. Then if we go over to our admin console, under main settings, we have this language file setting. I'm going to talk more about this in just a little bit. But what we can do is here where it says NUS getting started, it's referencing this file. We're going to append this dash file on the end of it. And we're going to hit apply. So this is telling Exago to use the new custom file instead of that default. And again, when we relaunch Exago, we'll see that our new custom file is going to be used and it's going to load in here. So this gives us a new custom, more visually integrated content. But also, in addition to just sort of visual integration, it gives us really nice space to provide the user with some more information. So here we have announcements. Say, for example, we have a new dashboard that we just built as an example, in one of our standard reports. We can let users know what new content is available. If we have scheduled downtime, we can let them know about that. Or maybe we have an event coming up that we want to put a link to here, we can. We also added some quick action buttons. So here, if I wanted to say, let a user quickly open our Express View Designer, we can give them another way to do that. So if we have some basic actions that we just want to make very visible and easy, we can do that here. And in our case, we added some tips and tricks. We thought that would be a nice use of this space as well. So the getting started content is something you can totally customize. It has a lot of capabilities. We've seen clients do some really neat things with laying out what their data is available, describing some of the standard reports, or making announcements. So this is sort of a modest replication of that. Again, like the application themes, you can set that language setting per user. So here we could have different content for different users, and that's certainly something that's available as well. I just want to pause here to see, are there any questions? So a question came up, is this getting started content example available on our site? So it's not currently. After this, though, I'd be happy to send it out. We're happy to share it. And as well as we do have some good examples of custom getting started content on our site. If you go to our support site and go to getting started, if you search for that, you'll see some custom examples as well. Okay, perfect. So with that, visually, we see that we've come a long way in terms of integration, right? We've removed all the orange, we've changed all the icons of the application, and we've added some really meaningful getting started content that not only visually wraps together the Exago application with the host application, but gives us a nice space to make the user experience even better. But the other thing you might say is, well, this is great for my English speakers, but what if I want to change, to another country, or want to expand globally, right? So we're an ambitious company here. In fact, our fictitious company claims to be the best in the universe, so we're going to have to support multi-language. And beyond that, even if we just want to maybe change some of the English within Exago, we're going to want to have that capability. So coming back to our installation, in our languages folder, we see that there are a couple of other files that by default are going to be used by Exago. So the first one here is our enus XML. And what this is an XML file that pairs IDs within Exago, so elements of the Exago interface, with the language that should appear. So this is, say, for example, where the Getting Started tab knows to say Getting Started, right? And again, we can make changes directly here, but each time we run the Exago installer, this file is going to be updated. So generally, we don't want to do that. But we also don't want to copy. This file is pretty long, and we don't want to copy this entire file and have to go through changing individual elements and remembering which one we changed. So the nice part here is that we can make our own custom files. So we can just make an XML file, give it whatever name we want. So in this case, I've added one here for some extensibility features that we've either detailed in the past or will detail in future webinars. So you can make your own smaller file and only add the elements you want to modify. Then in the administration console, we can specify as many language files here as we'd like, loading them from left to right. And what that's going to do is, just like CSS, it's going to layer these files, so it'll load them in order, and then it'll take the last file's changes on top of the other ones. So here we can use, for example, our Spanish file, ESMS, and we can also change the tooltips. So our tooltips and our base UI are now going to appear in Spanish if we load these files. But then the custom work that we've done, we didn't translate this here into another language, so these custom files are going to maintain in English. They're going to load from left to right. And the nice part about this is there are a lot of languages with, regional dialects. So if you wanted to have, we have a sort of Mexican, Latin American Spanish, but if you wanted to have peninsular Spanish, you wouldn't have to change this entire file. You could find only the elements you want to modify and then load those on the end here, and they would apply on top. The other neat thing the language files can do is, if we look at enus tooltips, is they can set not only the language elements themselves, so for example where it says, getting started, or browse reports, or search for report names, but they can also modify the tooltips. So as I hover over elements, these tooltips are loaded dynamically from the language files as well. And you'll notice that these can contain formatting and images. So we've seen some really cool use cases where folks will not only use these for translations, but also to embed, custom help, videos, or other, images that assist the user in making decisions. And you can see those here. These are HTML being embedded as tooltips on top of elements of the UI. So that's how we can change the base UI. But you may say, well, what if I'm running a report? In my ExpressView Designer, I have these data objects, and I want to make sure that these data objects are also named accordingly. So another thing we can do here is when we define the data objects, we do that again in the admin console. So here I'm going to look at my customers object, and we give each data object an alias, and we can set column metadata on particular columns. So we can change the name of not only the data object, but also but also each individual column we can give it an alias as well. And so in doing this, this can be adjusted via the API per user, so we can have the data objects, if we want to, can also be localized for different languages. Apologies, folks. I want to make one mention of something I forgot to mention here. If we do make a custom file in our languages folder, there's a helpful reminder, and it is a reminder, as I myself just forgot to mention it here, that when you make a custom file like this, we want to make sure to also copy it into the languages folder of the scheduler. So every scheduler instance has a languages folder, and we want to make sure to copy any custom files that we make inside of the Exago installation into the schedule installation as well. So you'll notice we copied that here, and that's a useful reminder, you know, as you build language files, that you want to make sure that they exist in both places here. Great. So that covers the UI and data objects. And you may say, well, that's great, but what if a user, when designing a report, makes some static text, right? So maybe they make a change to, you know, label a column, and they're not using a data field, they're not using a language element of the Exago UI, it's just plain static text, right? So here, our UI is now in Spanish, but here they just type, you know, my type, right? Or I suppose in Spanish it would be mi título. You may want to still have this translate, and now we can go even deeper here using some of the extensibility features that we've described in the past. So you can make custom functions to translate this text for the user to specify that this text should be translated. But also, we have a neat example where using one of our extensibility features called server events, and we covered server events in our support lab on user preferences a little bit, but server events are throughout our application. They're these moments where your custom code can interface with Exago's session and see what's going on and make changes. So if we want to change, you know, the static text of a report, we can use a server event when a report first runs to inspect the text of the report and change it. And so I'm going to just briefly show the code for that here. So we have a server event we've created here called translate report objects. And as you'll notice, it, you know, translates the report. And so what it does is it says, well, what language do we want the user to show text in? Then it looks at every cell of the report, and it looks for a property called isStaticField or isStaticValueType. And if the text is static, meaning the user just typed in some text, it'll call a helper function called translate. Now, because this is a server event, you know, you can use this however you'd like. So you can, you know, call Google Translate's API, you could call your own local language files, you could call the Exago language files if you wanted to. And then it'll use this last method, session report.recreate sections, to apply those changes. And then it'll return, and the report execution will carry on its way. So this is a neat way that you can translate actual static text generated by a user dynamically behind the scenes for them. So for different reports, you can have this event run, and it will translate the text of a report. So you can translate not only the UI of Exago, so you'll see that here, the tooltips, but also the names of columns and data objects, as well as static text. So in terms of localization, you have a lot of options there for changing different elements. So with that, just as a brief recap as we approach the bottom of the hour, what we've done here is we look at visual integration, creating an application theme, and you can do that either manually or using the utility that's now available for download, as well as building some getting started content, again, totally customizable, that helps visually wrap together Exago as well as enhance the user experience. And then we looked at multi-language capabilities. So we talked about the language files, where they need to go, and how they can be changed. We briefly mentioned that you can change column metadata and data object aliases. And then we also talked about static text. If you want, you can change that using custom functions. We showed the code for a server event here. So I know in half an hour we've covered a lot of topics here. So I do want to mention that this is a recorded session. So of course, like all of our support labs, these are available on our support site if you want to go back and look at any of those code samples, pause the video. But I also want to pause here and see if there are any other questions. Okay, so there have been a bunch of great questions. So the first question was in the language files, the language elements are kept in XML. So the question here was, is this UTF-8? Does it support multi-byte characters for languages such as Chinese, Korean, etc.? And the answer is absolutely. So if I scroll up to the top here, this is absolutely encoded in UTF-8 for exactly that reason. The second question here was what tool is used to translate? And so Exago by default comes with a translation of our UI, of course, in English, but then also a translation in Spanish. It's not a specific tool. We do the translations in-house with some of our staff who has experience speaking multiple languages here. But certainly, you can use, either a third-party translator or if you want a rough translation, there are lots of free tools. The most sort of infamous at this point being Google Translate can be fairly effective. And in terms of the server event example we talked about before, the translate method is entirely your own. So you can use whichever application you would like as well. Okay. A great question came up here saying that I mentioned copying any custom files from the language folder to the language folder on the scheduler installation. And the question came up, well, do I need to do the same thing if I make a new configuration file? So here we have a configuration built by the administration console. And the question is, do you need to copy this to the scheduler as well? The answer is no. The scheduler will be aware of what all the settings in that file are as the schedule is created. And then another question came in that says, if we have clients who are all over the world, how can we change the language per area here? And the answer is you can create language files for all of the languages you want to support, and then you can set which language files to use dynamically through the API. So as the user logs in, you know what language is being supported in the host application's UI, and you can set Exago to use the same language, the language files you specify here. Of course, coming out of the box, we have our English and then our Spanish translation available. Great question. The server event I mentioned here, this is, of course, has to be mapped to a particular event in the runtime of Exago. So this server event, the concept here is that this is on report execute start. So as the report first starts, you can inspect the report, find all the static text, translate it, tell the report to save those translations, and then return to the regular report execution. So far, these have been great questions today. So I want to pause to let folks ask more questions if there are any. But I should mention that we have 2 labs coming up. Every month we give 2 labs. One's going to be end-user focused and the other will be technical. So on the 11th, my colleague Emma is going to give a breakdown of linked reports, how to build them, how to utilize them, but also some insight into how the filtering behind the scenes with linked reports applies. And then on the 25th, the service team, I believe it'll be me, will be walking through our API. And so we're going to go in an in-depth walkthrough of the API as it launches Exago. And we're going to do that for .NET, so this will be fairly technical. We'll be walking through Visual Studio, as well as a REST example to show both languages, both technologies, how they can, launch a session of Exago, changing specific user permissions, setting security, things like that. So hopefully you'll be able to join us for those as well. Great question. On the server event, can you utilize parameters that have been set via the API? So I'm mentioning the API here. And the answer is absolutely. So because all of our server events have access to our session info, they know what settings have been made through the API. So you can look for parameters. You can change this based on the language settings of Exago, but also other parameters you set, or even based on which user it is or which report is being executed. So you have a lot of fine-grained control here. This is sort of a very basic example. Great. So with that, we're just hitting the bottom of the hour. So I just want to say thank you for joining the support lab today. I hope you guys found it useful and insightful. There are lots of examples we've walked through here, and those will be available in our documentation on our support site. But also, of course, if you ever have any questions, please feel free to email services@exago.com, and we hope that you'll join us in October's labs. All right, everyone. Thank you very much, and have a nice day. Happy reporting.